Hi everyone, Chris Briggs here from SSW TV, and today I'm here with Zac, Gamification expert. How are you going today, Zac?
Good, Chris. How are you going?
Good. It's a tad cold for a Brisbane night down here in Sydney.
Yeah, is it?
Yes. So for the viewers at home, can you tell us what is gamification?
Sure. So basically gamification is about framing everyday activities like video games, I guess, or like games to make them more enjoyable. So it's, I guess if we have a look, back in history, we've used fun in games to motivate and engage people for a very long time now. However, more recently, designers, I guess, have begun to directly translate elements from video games to non-game contexts in order to try and create more motivating and engaging experiences. Examples of this could be if you have an Apple Watch, for example, or a Fitbit. When you're using that to track your fitness, you often receive points and achievements for when you reach certain personal bests or milestones. I think that this is partly because video games, first of all, have become mainstream in terms of their popularity, and also because mobile technology and sensors has become much more cheaper and accessible. And because of that, we're able to track more, I guess, about what we do every day. And then it's quite easy to add game elements to track or to reward us for undertaking particular tasks. So I guess the term gamification has been coined to describe this design strategy, taking game elements and applying it to non-game contexts. And in the last 5 years, a huge industry kind of has grown around providing gamification services. There's conferences that are being run every year, and there are more and more people practicing gamification design.
So what application first made gamification really work?
What application made gamification first really work? That is a good question. I guess if we go back a little bit and look at the history of gamification, I guess, as I said before, the concept behind it isn't new. We've been using games to motivate people for a long time now. But the term gamification is quite new. And it apparently has been first used, I guess, back in almost 2002. But the first documented use of the term gamification was in 2008, used in a blog post. And it was the year after that Foursquare was released. And now Foursquare is it was a service, it's kind of a social network location sharing service. So you could use Foursquare to check into a location, such as a cafe or a park, and then you could share this location with your friends to let them know where you were. Now, what was interesting about Foursquare were there had been other apps out there like this before, but Foursquare added game elements to their particular system. So you received points, I guess, for checking into locations, and then the more places you checked into, you got more points, and you could compare, how many points you had with your other friends, and you also unlocked things like badges when you checked into places such as being on a boat, for example. And one other interesting other interesting game element they introduced was the concept of mayorships. So if you were the person who checked in the most to a particular location, you would then become kind of the virtual mayor of that location. And Foursquare was incredibly popular. I can't remember the stats exactly, but there were millions of users of Foursquare. And a lot of people, I guess, looked at Foursquare and they looked at how they had included these game elements, and they were like, well, these game elements seem pretty good. We could probably use similar strategies to try and engage people or motivate people to use our services as well. And I guess this kind of gamification blueprint became known, which is the use of badges, leaderboards, and points. And we see this blueprint, I guess, of gamification being applied to many other different areas as well, with varying degrees of success. So I guess Foursquare is kind of one of the first kind of apps that really spurred on the popularity of gamification. In about 2011, the term became really popular. It was added to Gartner's hype cycle. 2012, people became a little dubious about gamification. What was interesting was Gartner then released another post saying that a large number of gamified applications, I think it was about 80%, would actually fail by 2014.
So do you think we've seen that trend materialize?
Ooh, that's a good point. A good question. It's interesting. I think we've seen a maturing of gamification. So people have, people kind of looked at it a little bit as a bit of a magic bullet. It's like if we add game elements to our website or our app, then we could increase engagement potentially. But I think we're beginning to understand that it's not just that easy, and that it's much more than just adding badges, leaderboards, and points. And so gamification has begun to mature a little bit, well, quite a bit actually, over the last few years. And
so as we've gone through this process, as we've gone through this process of gamification maturing, what have we discovered is really the driving force that makes gamification work so well?
Yeah, okay. So I guess it's worthwhile noting that not all gamification will work. And you know, it's not a magic bullet. You can just add badges, a leaderboard, and points to your website, and bam, engagement skyrockets. It really depends on what you're trying to do with it. So most gamification will be added to encourage some kind of behavior change. That's generally what it's used for, whether this is engaging people to use an app or a piece of software more, or encouraging a particular behavior through an app, such as encouraging people to take more steps during the day. I think it's important to look at the roots of gamification, though, when we're looking or considering about what makes gamification work. And of course, that is video games, or games in general. So it's good to look at gamification in terms of, you know, why games are so popular and why games are so engaging. So for example, have you played World of Warcraft, Chris?
Yes, I've lost many hours on it.
Have you? Yeah. So for those of you, for those people listening who don't know what World of Warcraft is, been living under a rock maybe, it's what's known as an MMORPG. So it's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. You pick a character. Which one did you choose? Were you orc, human, gnome?
Blood Elf Paladin. From day one,
Blood Elf
played
Paladin.
The same character.
Fantastic. So yeah, you pick that character, right? And then you head off on quests while around you other people are playing as well. It's incredibly engaging. So how much time do you think we have collectively spent, the world, in World of Warcraft?
I looked it up the other day.
Did you? Yeah.
There's a command /time, and it tells you in how many hours, minutes, days, weeks, months.
That you personally have spent.
Yeah, I personally have put on that character with my little brother, and we're starting to arc up towards a week. Towards a week.
So like an entire week. That's 24 hours times 7.
Yeah, nearly 140 odd hours.
That's impressive for a video game, right? If you consider some other video games out there, you know, most people may finish a game in, say, 8 hours, or even.
That's a sign of
it depends really on what the game is. So to spend that much time in, you know, individually in World of Warcraft is quite significant. It was interesting. There was I think one analyst calculated that as of 2012, we have spent collectively 50 billion hours of game time in World of Warcraft. So that adds up to about 5.9 million years. And that's just one game, right? And this is a game that isn't free, so you have to pay a monthly subscription to play. So we have people out there actively paying to play this game for many, many hours. And as you can imagine, these figures suggest that these games such as World of Warcraft, can be pretty engaging. And so I guess the idea behind gamification, if we want to look at making it work, it's really looking at how these games, or games similar to this, these really engaging games, create such an engaging experience, and then how we can kind of translate this to other areas, non-game contexts like work or exercise, to make it more interesting and more engaging. But yeah, so in that sense, to make gamification work, we really have to look at what makes games engaging. What makes games engaging. So yeah, I think looking at games, looking at why they're so intrinsically motivating to play, you know, because they have a clear goal, they have a challenge which is suited to the player, they have, you know, good feedback, a good sense of progress. Things like this can be used to kind of potentially be translated to other areas to try and make more engaging, motivating.
Now, if you don't mind me asking, I've now publicly revealed my WoW time. How many hours have you spent in the game?
Well, so I'm more of a, well, I play a lot of PC games. I've only spent, believe it or not, about 15 hours in World of Warcraft. 15 hours. So I started playing it, and I realized I could spend a lot of time playing this game. And so I made the active decision decision to. I played it for a bit, tried it out, and then moved on to other games because there are so many games out there, and especially when you're looking at game design in particular, you want to try and play as many games as possible. So I would like to just take some time off and play it because it's incredible. It's still popular, even though it's been out for, when did it come out? 2000.
It's over 10 years old now.
It's at least 10 years old now, right? And it's still incredibly popular. I mean, a lot has changed since then. They've added a lot of content to it, and a lot of new things. But yeah, it's pretty exciting. So yeah, not as many hours as I'd like to. Is the answer.
So this is a very interesting idea we've just touched on. So for example, SSW has a product called Sugar Learning, which is designed to use game elements to make the induction process really engaging.
Yeah.
And even though it's a good product, I haven't heard of anyone wanting to spend 150 hours in it. So are there different kinds of gamification?
Yes, I guess. So we were talking about this. We were talking about kind of this shallow versus deep gamification, right? And it's a metaphor which personally I haven't used that often, but it's probably a very good way of talking about or distinguishing between, I guess, the simple application of things like points, badges, and leaderboards. Versus more deep, game-like, I guess, designs or designs which have really looked at the game design processes and theories behind it. So it's quite easy to add points, badges, and leaderboards to a website in order to reward people for completing particular activities, like visiting pages, watching videos, leaving a comment, etc. And I guess you could consider this to be shallow gamification to a certain extent. Kind of, it's a solution that doesn't really consider, first of all, what the underlying problem is. It's more adding gamification for the sake of it. So maybe you've heard that it's worked somewhere else, for example, Foursquare, and you want to see kind of if this blueprint works for you. So don't get me wrong, this can work in some cases when you have users who are completely amotivated to begin with, but the novelty of it can wear thin. And what we're doing is we're really assuming that users value these badges and points, for example, when in actual fact, who knows if they are. So then in terms of, I guess, deep gamification, I feel that this would look at how a gamified solution can be built to properly support the underlying motivational problem that exists. It could then, provide an interesting goal, feedback, progress, and a suitable challenge tailored to the target demographic of the application. And this is really an important thing to consider when you're creating gamification, is that you have your users. So when you develop an app, you create some kind of software for your users, you have a certain demographic that you're targeting. But then when you're creating gamification, it's also really useful to think of your users as players, people who like different things from different games, and to consider what kind of games they like as well. So some people like addictive puzzle games, others like fast-moving, first-person shooter games, others like narrative-driven games. So it's incredibly useful to consider who our users are as players and think about what they like in games. So this can be a really good starting point, I guess. And then I guess another thing to consider is that, games aren't fun because of their achievements, their points and levels. These things are really important in terms of providing feedback to the player. But generally what makes a game kind of really fun is having some kind of challenge, some kind of obstacle to overcome. Whether it's working out the best strategy to beat another player in a game of chess, for example, or whether it's trying to time a jump just right so Mario can kind of make it across to that platform. So this kind of challenge and learning how to overcome this challenge and coming up with strategies, that's what really makes games fun.
So something very interesting, even shallow gamification really invests users. So I'll regale you for a story. I remember only recently I took a support request for Sugar Learning and we had an upset user. And the reason the guy was upset was on the high scoreboard, someone was placed above him, even though he had more points. And this guy was really annoyed. He was like, that leaderboard means something. It's my place. He'd fired off an email, and we had to go patch it, of course. So it's amazing seeing the behavior that gamification brings out in people. And I don't know if that's always really a positive behavior we should be encouraging, are there things that we as developers should really be looking out for before we just go and throw gamification into an app?
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a really interesting finding. So was that a bug that caused that issue, or was that...
Yes, it was a small
Yeah.
bug with how points being calculated.
That's interesting, though, because you could clearly see he was quite passionate about being at the top of the leaderboard. So, I mean, you know, it still goes to show that these things, these points, badges, and leaderboards can be quite motivating, particularly to different types of people. You know, people who, you know, there's a challenge, they want to overcome that challenge. But, of course, there are certain things you need to be careful of when implementing gamification. You know, an important consideration is that when you create a game-like experience for people, you can attract game-like behavior from your users, which may not be something which has ever happened or has kind of appeared previously in some of your software. So all of a sudden you may have users who are, you know, really motivated to get to the top or to be the first. And you could also have people who potentially try and game the system. So that is cheat in order to complete, you know, kind of, or to get to the top, to complete the goals of the game. We've had that in one of our apps before. We had people, we made an app which allowed people to check into various events. And when they checked into a certain number of events, they received badges for doing that. And we had a couple of people admit that, yeah, they checked into, you know, a couple of events that they didn't actually attend. And they did it just to unlock the badge, which was quite interesting. You know, it didn't...
Was that the application that I tried when I met you, the QT one for the first one, where I met you?
Yeah, it was interesting. That was an orientation, an app that we had made that could be used at university orientations. And yeah, that was interesting. So it rewarded badges to students for completing certain orientation tasks. And one of them was attending events. But yeah, it was interesting. We had a couple of people. Some people were really motivated to kind of complete all of the achievements. But then we also had some people who gamed the system as well, which was really an amusing finding for us back then, because it wasn't something we, you know, I guess we'd really considered in the design process. So you know, now we can consider potentials for cheating and how we would handle it.
It's interesting the behavior that that app encouraged me to form. So at the time, I didn't actually have an iPhone. I had a little iPod Touch. And iPod Touch can pull location data from the Wi-Fi hotspots, but they can't get it individually. So Qt has this array of different Wi-Fi hotspots, and I had to get to a certain spot we call the kidney lawn. The only hotspot next to it was this old government house. And the only way to get to the Wi-Fi hotspot is basically getting right in the middle. So I joined this tour. I'm flying around all these old people, and I'm holding up my iPod Touch, trying to get on the Wi-Fi. And I just remember people just like staring at me going, what are you
What is this
doing?
person doing?
What's wrong with you?
That's pretty funny.
So,
but I guess this is the limitations of some systems as well. So, I mean, the reason people could check into events was that because of the sensors. So we were using GPS at the time to work out where they were. And then we were using the time of the event as well. So as long as they were kind of in the vicinity and it was the time of the event, they could check into the event. But the thing was, GPS isn't that accurate when you're inside buildings. And so we had to increase the radius of where people could check into in order to allow for this kind of inaccuracies of GPS, which meant that people could cheat basically if they wanted to, as long as they were kind of in the vicinity of the area. So, you know, that was interesting because we had to make accommodations for usability, you know, because otherwise, I mean, that was unlucky that it was just Wi-Fi, so, you know, people holding up their phones. But yeah, we had to make accommodations for GPS just because of, you know, technology limitations at the time. So maybe we could have come up with a bit, maybe scanning QR codes or something. So this is another interesting thing to consider as alternatives when you know, these problems do exist. I guess another really important thing to consider as well when you're designing gamification is whether the gamification goals you created actually align to your business goals as well. So an example of this would say you had some kind of website or forum, and on this website or forum you have added game elements to encourage participation, so encouraging people to post, you know, to post a comment on your website. So you could add gamification, for example, to that. You could reward people with points every time they post a comment. They could unlock badges, for example. However, is posting a comment, the real goal of this? And it's quite interesting to kind of dig a little deeper and realize that, okay, that's great. We can reward people for posting comments, but is that the actual business goal that we have? And in actual fact, I would argue that maybe it's not just posting comments, it's posting quality comments, right? But because of certain limitations of technology, so it's really easy to pick up to measure quantitative data. So we can easily determine if someone's visited our websites, if they're using the length of sessions that they have with our websites or applications, and if they're posting a comment, and we can reward game elements for that. But what's really hard is to automatically kind of measure the quality of certain things. And I've seen examples of people just posting random stuff on websites in order to, nonsensical stuff, posts in order to get achievements, unlock achievements, and get points. So that's another really interesting thing to consider, something to look out for when implementing gamification too.
So from looking at these negatives, it seems like the first thing any developer should do before adding the points library is actually try and identify the problem they're trying to solve and what behavior would be the positive ones to encourage. Do you have any tips how?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think the really important thing is trying to work out your problem first. So not to jump to the conclusion that you need game elements, or not to jump to the conclusion that you need badges, points, and leaderboards. And because that's kind of jumping to the solution without really considering the underlying problem. So you need to kind of, first of all, actually determine if there is a motivation problem that exists. Because the reason we add game elements, or we look at gamification, or look at adding it to our systems, is to actually try and encourage some sort of behavior change. So I think it's a bit of a two-step process for identifying, kind of the problem. So it's first, required to kind of identify what the actual problem is and what are the goals, both in terms of the business goals and the user goals. And once you've identified these, you can then determine if gamification is actually worth using to address this problem. So first up, finding the problem. You may have some kind of hunch that a problem exists. Maybe you think that people aren't engaging enough with your website, or maybe they're not purchasing, enough through your e-commerce website. So you may have a hunch that this problem exists, maybe talk to a couple of people, but you really need to validate that this problem is a problem that is being experienced, with your system. So there are a range of validation techniques that can be used. You can look at capturing data on your website, interactions, things like that quite easily. How people, for example, interact with your website, how long their sessions are, if they're going through with purchases. You can actually, if you have an office, you could get people in and you can actually talk to some of your target users or your target demographic. People who have used, say, your website, for example, and you can talk to them and see, is this a motivation problem that they're actually happening? You could sit them down, you can get them to interact, you could watch, observe what they do. Of course, if you can't bring people into your office, you could always create a questionnaire and send that out. So the main reasons for doing these kind of things is to really work out on a large scale if a problem actually exists. And one really important thing then to consider is what kind of problem it is. So is it actually a motivation problem, or is there another problem there? Is it potentially a usability problem that exists? And it's quite easy to get fooled into the idea that people aren't motivated enough to, for example, purchase things on your website. But until you actually observe people trying to do that, there could be something else which is completely wrong. Maybe they're missing where the checkout button is, or maybe the whole process takes too long, so you kind of lose them 3/4 of the way in. So it's really important to consider whether it's a motivation problem or whether it's a usability problem that you're having with whatever system you have set up. And then if it is a motivation problem, it's important to consider, okay, is this a suitable place which we can apply gamification to? Probably if the task is a little serious. So say, for example, someone's stolen your credit cards or your wallet, and you want to call up and you want to cancel your credit cards. We probably wouldn't gamify a system like that because people would be stressed out. It's like, you just got, the badge for getting your card stolen, right? So you've really, you've got to consider what the activity is and if it's going to be suitable to have a game-like experience attached to it. So I think that's really some of the most important things to consider is A, if it's a motivation problem to begin with, or if there's, it's actually something else, a usability problem, and B, is it suitable in terms of adding gamification to it?
So Because when you're trying to understand the difference between the usability and motivation, it can be a bit difficult without some examples. Would you have a few you'd recommend people really going and having a look at to see the difference?
Oh, so you mean good examples of gamification, or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. There's some excellent examples of gamification out there. I guess one of my favorites would be Duolingo. I don't know if have you seen this one before?
Yes.
If you haven't, you should check it out. It's it's great. I think their belief as a company is that everyone should have the access to education of the highest quality for free. And what Duolingo provides is that it allows people to learn languages. So they can, it's an app or it's a website you can jump on, and basically it provides a very easy way in which to learn languages. But what's really nice about it is they've gamified the whole experience. And it's probably one of the best gamified designs I've seen out there. So, it's not, they do have elements such as badges, I think. I have to double check. But at least you get things like lingots, points, some kind of virtual currency. So they do have, these things that we've seen in gamification designs up to now. There's this blueprint of gamification. But what I really like about Duolingo is the way in which they've set it out. So it's very much a journey through the language that you're learning. You level up, and you can kind of, at some point, choose what you'd like to tackle next. But then the actual language learning activities they have are quite fun. They're almost game-like. So, some of them you have to speak in to the actual microphone. Some of them you have to select. It's multiple choice. Some you have to write. They're actually challenging. They're interesting. They're quite fun. And what's really nice is that, it starts off easy and then gets harder and harder as you go. So I think in terms of, in terms of game design principles and processes, I think these guys, the people at Duolingo, have done an excellent job when it comes to the design of it. Another one of my favorites is Zombies Run. Have you heard of Zombies Run before?
Yes, I tried to do the 5K run, but the zombies just keep eating me.
So Zombies Run is great. It's another excellent example of, something which is much more game-like and quite challenging. So, there are many fitness apps out there which reward you with points, badges, and leaderboards. I mean, you can, compare how many steps you've done during the day to all your other friends, but that kind of gets a little bit boring after a while. But Zombies Run is different. It's very much a narrative-driven game. So you start running, you put on your headphones, and kind of this narrative unfolds as you run. And it's kind of set in this post-apocalyptic world full of zombies. But yeah, as you said, if you turn it on, you can get chased by zombies as you're running, which is hilarious and terrifying at the same time. So you hear the zombies breathing down your neck, and you actually, I think it uses location GPS sensing or something. It can determine when you're running faster, and so you have to run faster at that point in order to outrun the zombies. Otherwise, they get on your stuff. So they don't kill you, which is good.
The last time I tried it, the zombies were breathing down my neck, and someone reached out and grabbed my shoulder. I was freaking out, like, what's going on?
That's terrifying, yeah.
Oh, it is. You don't think it would freak you out so much, but you get so invested.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. So I think these ones are really well-designed gamification designs, and I think they must have had, definitely it helps to have a game designer on board or someone who is, has experience helping you craft a solution which fits the problem that you actually have. And it helps to look at it as if making kind of, what makes games so engaging rather than just kind of jumping to a points, badges, and leaderboard solution. I'm also excited about, did you hear the announcement for Pokemon Go?
I'm trying to get my hopes up. I'm trying, but I'm very, very excited.
Yeah, so we'll have to see more of what it's like. But I guess what's interesting is on the flip side. So you can have these kind of. This is where it starts to blur between game and gamification, and it'll be interesting. I think a few years from now, maybe the word gamification won't exist.
So Zach, just for the people at home watching this interview, who might not be Pokemaniacs like ourselves.
Yeah, what people are
just to quickly explain what Pokemon Go is. It's going to be the free app from Nintendo, and it's going to have a wearable device.
Yeah, so that's kind of going to be interesting as well. I guess Pokemon, it's a kind of, I guess you call it an RPG game. It was quite unique. It came out in the 90s on Game Boy. The whole idea is you go around, you have these little creatures, you catch them, and you use them to battle other creatures and other trainers. So you're called a trainer in the game. And there have been, it's been a hugely successful franchise. It's been incredibly popular. And now we're starting to see, or we just, you know, as last week or a week and a half ago, we saw the release of a new type of Pokemon game coming out. And this is one which is going to be situated in the real world. So instead of playing it just, you know, on your Game Boy, this is one where you'll actually have to, I'm guessing, go around, you know, to different places to find different Pokemon and catch them in the real world, which is going to be quite interesting. Now, what's interesting about this is primarily a game. It's not gamification as such. It's what's, I guess, known as a pervasive game. Yet it's still, if we're looking at, you know, the ability for it to encourage exercise, it's possibly going to be a great and super engaging example of something which can, you know, encourage us to undertake more physical activity, even though it is more likely just a game. So yeah, I guess I'm excited for Pokemon Go. If it gets people out and about moving, it's going to be great, and it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of experience they create.
It's going to be really interesting. So when that comes out, I'm coming down to QUT just to challenge you.
Sounds good.
It's on.
Excellent. I look forward to it.
So if people would like to keep in touch, maybe Pokemon battle you, where can they find you?
So if you head to gamificationweekly.com, you can find, you can sign up for a newsletter there where I send out, you know, periodical updates on gamification, the latest news, interesting facts, research that's being done in the area, and fun things, comics, etc. So yeah, you can jump onto that. And there's also a new website which I'll be announcing soon through that newsletter, which is going to provide basically a hub of information about gamification and provide a number of ways in which you can get started with gamification. So yeah, if you sign up to the newsletter for gamificationweekly.com, then you'll be able to find out more information about that.
Excellent. So on Twitter you are?
Zefcan, Z-E-F-C-A-N. If you go to gamificationweekly.com, you'll be able to find a link to my Twitter and to the Facebook webpage as well. It's probably easier to remember than my Twitter handle. It's something I need to update. I've had for years.
Thank you for being on the SSW TV today.
Hey, no worries. It was a lot of fun.
Do you want more great content? Then hit subscribe. Do you have a comment for Zac? Leave it below and definitely like this video. Many thanks.
Thanks.